So I'm going to ask Joel to introduce our guest speaker today.
Okay, so this is my second introduction and last of the semester. So if you saw my last one, I start with a script, then I turn off the teleprompter, then I get a little nervous, but roughly in that order. So Satsuki Ina, excuse me, PhD, was born in the Tule Lake Segregation Center, World War II maximum security prison camp for Japanese Americans, designated by U.S. authorities as disloyal. She is the co-founder of Tsuru for Solidarity, a nonviolent direct action project of Japanese American social justice advocates, working to end detention sites and support frontline immigrant and refugee communities being targeted by racist, inhumane immigration policies. She has produced 2 award-winning documentary films, From a Silk Cocoon and Children of the Camps. She is a psychotherapist specializing as a community trauma consultant, and she is author of The Poet and the Silk Girl, a memoir of love, imprisonment, and protest, published in 2024. So I first saw her give this presentation at the California Museum. So if you were not there, you're in for a treat today, and you don't have to sign up to become a member today, but it's highly recommended. I also highly recommend that you go on her website and listen to her keynote speech of this year at the Manzanar Pilgrimage, 56th annual. Very moving. And she was, it's been a long time, she was a professor here for many, many decades, inspired students, led students. No? Okay. Okay, a couple decades. Okay, all right. So please give a warm Renaissance Society welcome back to the campus for Dr. Ina, our speaker.
Thank you, Joel. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm really honored to be back on campus, and I've even had a little reunion with students that I've known back from way back then, and colleagues and friends. So it's lovely to be here. So before I start, I want to give you a little recent background. It was in 2019 that a young Japanese American attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union called me on the phone. His grandfather had been held where I was born at the Tule Lake Segregation Center, which is in Northern California. It's right at the border with just below the Oregon border. And he was very emotional. I knew his mother, but it was the first time I had spoken with him on the phone. And he said that he had just come back from the Carnes Family Residential Center, where 1,400 mothers and children who had arrived seeking asylum were being held. And he said that ACLU wanted to get access to the children, but no one was allowed. Once they had the grand opening, Carl, the young man I'm talking about, and his colleagues were admitted into the facility before the prisoners were brought in. And he was distraught when he called me. And he said that they were proudly showing these facilities and were waiting for the prisoners to arrive. And he said that what he saw was cribs inside of the cells. But he said what really got him is he opened up, the guy that was doing the tour opened up the supply cabinet. And in the supply cabinet were rows and rows of little shoes. And so he said that the ACLU wants to know what is the impact on the children? No outside professionals were allowed inside the facility. So I was to go undercover as a religious visitor and meet with the mothers and children. They were allowed to visit with religious visitors. So I don't speak Spanish and I don't speak any of the indigenous languages of the people that were here from Central America. So a priest had to sit with me with our backs against the officers, so they couldn't tell that I was that he was translating for me. So I said, okay, as soon as I get my ticket, I'll be there. And it was the beginning of a pathway that had suddenly opened in terms of how I was going to spend the rest of my life. So I went there to visit, and these were mothers and children. Some of the mothers were still breastfeeding. Some of them had carried their babies across the borders from Nicaragua. And I get emotional when I remember this because it was so unbelievable how they're being treated. And so I brought with me my little suitcase of play therapy toys and thought that I would have a chance to just visit with the children. But to my surprise, this was a full-blown prison, and they had those electronic giant doors that open and close. We had to take off our rings, our watches, belts, anything, and put them in a locker, including my play therapy suitcase. And the officers there were wearing laser guns and water bottles. And so we were admitted in, and then in a large room, there's a glass window, and you could see the mothers and children pressing their faces against the glass, hoping that the door won't close on them when they've had enough people that could come out and have their opportunity to speak with the priests and the nuns and the other volunteers, many of them from the American Friends Service Committee. And I asked this with one mother. I asked her what was it like for them, and I noticed that in the corner there was a carpet, a very brightly colored carpet and shelf with toys on it, spanking new toys, but not a single child was over there playing. They were clinging to their mothers. And the first mother I spoke to said that her daughter is not eating, sleeping. She's very angry. And she said, with tears in her eyes, she said, she's angry at me for bringing her to this terrible place. And so the translator was very helpful. And the mother said, she's not sleeping. So I asked her, what keeps you awake at night? And she said, the dogs. And I looked at the mother, and the mother said, the reason that they crossed so many borders to get here is because their community was crime-ridden, and her husband had been shot and killed. And the only way that she could survive to feed her children was to make tortillas and sell them on the streets. And the gang members would come and take the money. And when she resisted, they beat her up, and then they told her that if you make trouble for us next time, we'll take your son and make him a boy soldier, and we'll take your daughter and put her essentially into sex trafficking. So she went home, called friends, relatives, everybody to bring whatever money they could, because she had to leave with her children as soon as possible. And so a coyote was contacted, and this is like a guide that guides them across the borders. And she said that, so she left with her son and her daughter, and at one point the coyote disappeared. But before he disappeared, he said, when you see the man with the big hat, this is the ICE agents, just put your hands out and they'll take care of you. So she told me that the coyote had disappeared and they were lost for 4 or 5 days. She wasn't sure how long. And then they finally bumped into another person who knew the direction to the border. And when they got there and she saw the man with the big hat, and she said she was so happy, and she put her hands out and they cuffed her, and they let the dogs chase the children. And this was the nightmare that this little girl was living with. And I asked the little girl, what keeps you from eating? And she said, the black pepper. I said, what? Black pepper? And the mother said that when they're served the food, it's covered with black pepper. And the mothers complained to the people who are cooking the food. And the officer stepped in and said, this is so you tell your friends and neighbors not to come here. When we were leaving the facility, I asked the priest, what is being done to the water? Because the little girl was saying the water tastes bad. And the priest said, look around. Looked around and there are fracking machines. And the FDA had declared that that was drinkable water, but all the guards had their own water bottles with them. So the little girl's name was Elena, and she's been my teacher ever since. And when I looked into this little girl's eyes, I saw myself. I don't have any direct memories of being incarcerated, but I grew up with a mother that was anxious all the time, fearful that if we took any misstep, if we got into trouble in any way, that we could suddenly be imprisoned again. And so it was like a ghost living in my house because of the kind of trauma, the chronic level of trauma they suffered. They didn't talk about what happened. They didn't talk about what they endured and what they survived. And we knew somehow, my 2 brothers and I knew somehow that we're not supposed to ask. So that's not an uncommon circumstance when there has been collective community trauma. It's like everybody has non-verbally agreed that we will put it behind us and move forward. But what happens to the next generation is that the ghost is still there. There is some threat at any moment. Something terrible could happen. I remembered when I was a student at UC Berkeley during the free speech movement. Any of you remember the free speech movement? This is my audience. And there was news every evening showing students being dragged into these cars and taken to the local jail, being dragged out. And my parents would call me every night. And in this very unusual way that they said, you have to go to class, do not protest. We saved our money so you could get an education. We don't want to see your face in the newspaper. And she said, go to class. So I remember shortly after that, I'm walking to class, passing through Sather Gate, and all the other students are walking the other way. They're going to Sproul Hall where they're going to demonstrate. And I got to my classroom, which normally had about 100 students in it. And there were only 3 or 4 of us sitting in the room and waiting for the professor to show up. And he did. He was, of course, wearing his tie-dye t-shirt and his bell-bottom pants. Ran down the aisle, jumped on top of the desk, turned around, and he said, "God damn it, if you show up in class, I'm going to flunk every single one of you." And I was caught in this double bind. And got into an argument with my mother about why even the professor is saying it's the right thing to do. She said, "You need to come home." So I went home, and we lived in San Francisco, and I was in Berkeley, and very typical of my family dynamics. My father opens the door, smile on his face, and I know something bad is about to happen. I'm in deep trouble. And then he disappears, and then my mother is going to deliver the message. And so when I sat down, she immediately had tears in her eyes, and I said, what is it we have to talk about? And she said, "We never told you this, but when we were in camp, we renounced our American citizenship." And you have to remember, I was also probably wearing a tie-dyed shirt and had a braid across my forehead and maybe even a daisy in my hair. And so I asked her, "Why did you do that?" And she said that America had betrayed her, and Americans had turned their backs when they were being disappeared. And we thought that there would be no hope for a good life for our children. And if we renounced our citizenship, that we would be deported and sent to Japan. And by that time, both of us are crying. And I said, "Why didn't you tell us?" And she said, "We're afraid you'd be ashamed of us." And I said, "I'm not ashamed of you, Mom. I'm proud of you. And thank you for doing what you needed to keep us safe." And she said, "We still don't want you to protest." She said, "If you protest in this country, bad things will happen." So during the time that my parents were incarcerated, they became dissidents. They renounced their citizenship. They put all their hope that Japan would win the war. Prior to that time, they were dedicated American citizens. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, my parents signed up to join the Red Cross, to be part of the neighborhood guides, that if there was any kind of attack, that they would guide them to the underground places where people could be safe. They bought war bonds. But after the treatment that they suffered, they felt like there was no hope for them in America. So I had, after my father passed away, my mother and I were going through his desk to clear out his boxes and drawers full of paper. And in the back of one of the drawers, my mother and I were going through them, and I pulled it out, and there was a stack of letters with brown twine wrapped around it. And on the front of the first envelope, it said, "Prisoner of war, no postage necessary." And I looked at it, and my mother looked at it, and she said, "Oh, I didn't know Daddy saved my letters." And then she said, "Somewhere around here are the letters Daddy sent to me." And so handed her those letters, and I guess I thought that she would take those letters and hold them dearly. And she looked at them and she handed them back to me. And I put them in a box and carried those with me for years. I think part of it was my own reluctance to find out what they suffered, what they went through. And eventually I found the letters that my father had written to my mother, and there were 182 letters. And I had them in Sacramento while I was teaching. The box was always there next to my desk. But it wasn't until a young graduate student from Japan, who was a student of mine here, who was, bilingual and fluent, and also very attuned to people's emotions. I was on the faculty in the counselor education department. We're training people to be child therapists. And so I hired her to do the translation work, finally ready to start looking at these letters. And it was like magic. It was, this box full of secrets, because they were written in Japanese. My parents wrote their letters in Japanese. There's a lot of reasons for that around censorship by the military when they were writing back and forth. But so I had them all in a box, and they were each in their envelopes, and she would take it out, and many of them would be shredded because they had been censored. And but she could do this kind of magical thing. It's in Japanese, and she could start reading in English simultaneously. Yeah. And at one point, and so it was before I had a computer, before there was such a thing as a computer. I was working on a word processor. And so she would read and I would type. And at one point, she stopped in the middle of a sentence, and I looked over at her and she was crying. And my reaction is I reached over, I grabbed her arm, and I said, "Iko, you cannot cry. I'm not going to be able to go through this." And so she apologized profusely. And she started to read. And my father has written a poem to my mother, and he's saying, I'm missing my children who are growing up without me. As I watch the autumn leaves falling, I feel this grief. And Iko and I looked out the window, and there were these autumn leaves falling, and we both started to cry. And I felt like in that moment I had broken through my own defensive structure that I had built up over the years to not feel the depth of the trauma and the loss and the grief. And I think the rest of the time I cried my way through the whole translation process. So those letters became the basis for my book. My father had passed away by the time I was even considering it, but my mother was still alive when I started working on it. And, I said, I want your permission to be able to share these letters with people, to educate them about what happened to us. And she said, "Kodomo no tameni." In Japanese, it means for the sake of the children. Yes. So I'm going to introduce you to my family. My mother was living in Japan as a young woman, taking care of her ailing grandmother. And while she was there in the 1937, the Japanese government was preparing to enter their first World's Fair, the exposition in San Francisco on Treasure Island. And they wanted to demonstrate their silk industry because silk stockings in America were a big popular thing. And so they had developed this huge market for silk stockings. And so they did a national search looking for 4 women who would come to the U.S. as to demonstrate the silk reeling, pulling the silk thread out of the silk cocoon and making that into fabric. And so she was one of 4 of the silk girls. And there was a lot of press in the Japanese American community that these beautiful silk girls were going to come from Japan. And my father was a bachelor in San Francisco, very active in the Buddhist temple. He was also an amateur kabuki theater performer. And my mother's watch broke. Her escort, because she wasn't allowed to be without somebody if she was leaving the pavilion where she worked, went into Japantown and found the watchmaker to fix her watch. And the watchmaker was so excited about meeting one of the silk girls, he invited her back for dinner. And when she arrived for dinner, when she came to pick up her watch, the watchmaker introduced her to my father, whose parents had died, and the watchmaker was his replacement father. And even though, you know, they never used the word love in our family until I found their love letters. Because she went back to Japan to finish her job and say goodbye to the grandmother and to come back to be married to Itaru. Her name was Shizuko. So they were married in March of 1941. Pearl Harbor was bombed December 7th, 1941. And within months, they were in prison. So this is me and my brother. The top right one, that's me with my first petition, I think. So these photos were taken, the bottom one is when I was younger, but at that time, my father was taken from us because he made a statement in protest of Japanese American men being taken out of the prison to be drafted to fight in Europe for democracy. So my mother called herself an internment widow because my father was taken to a Department of Justice internment camp identified as an enemy alien. He was charged with sedition for this one sentence where he said, "We should be in protest of the drafting of young men who are in prison. We should be treated equal to the free people. And if I'm given my constitutional right to be free, I will do whatever my government asks me to do." And that was considered a statement that interfered with the draft, which is what sedition is. So you can see the barracks in the background. My mother was left behind with the 2 children. Once they were sent to Tule Lake, where I was born. Oh, I should tell you this too. I asked my mother, so my mother was pregnant with my brother when she was removed from her home in San Francisco. And so while I was working on this, I asked my mother, why would you have another child in a prison camp? And she said, we had no news about what was going to happen to us. This was indefinite detention. They had no idea how long they were going to be incarcerated. and they ended up being incarcerated for 4.5 years. And but the rumors were that if you had more children, you were less likely to have your family separated, which turned out not to be true in the end. So, you know, I think about the joy and excitement when she was pregnant with my brother, that he was going to be the promise of what they had hoped. They had many losses as young people themselves, so they were really looking forward to having their family. And I felt like I was born because they were in despair and were hoping that the family would stay together. This is the protest inside of the Tule Lake prison camp. These were dissidents who were organizing themselves to build up their physical health and to declare their loyalty to Japan. Now, they had no connection with the Japanese government. Japanese government suspected that Japanese Americans were spies. They didn't want Japanese Americans to come back to Japan. But they're imprisoned. They marched in the morning. They committed themselves to calisthenics and all ways to build up their bodies to return to Japan and fight for what they called their mother country. Then it was time to start to remove these dissidents. And these photos were taken by Robert Ross, who was an official in Tule Lake, but very sympathetic to the Japanese situation. So he took these photographs and surreptitiously took them and handed them to Wayne Collins, who came to check out what was happening. He was an ACLU attorney. Word had gotten out that there was a prison inside the prison and that men were being brutalized. So when I discovered these photos in my research, I was struck by how inhumanely they were being treated. And what's happening in these photos is these men are being taken from their families and placed on trucks and trains, separating them from their family and being put in these federal internment camps. In 1988, Japanese Americans, after many years, received reparations. And they had an exhibit at the Smithsonian. I'd been living in Europe with my two sons and for working for Boston University, and my assignment had been completed. And I wanted to stop in Washington to see this exhibit. And my older son had gone ahead, and I was with my junior high school aged son. And we went first to the Vietnam War Memorial. And again, I was crying. And so then I said, okay, we're going to go to the Smithsonian now to see this exhibit. And walked into this room and saw this very large picture. And I recognized my father. He's in the white t-shirt in front. It's kind of a blurry photo, but I knew the minute I looked at that picture that was him. And I realized how little I knew about what they had lived through. And I was crying again. And my junior high school age son looks at me and said, "Are we going to have any fun on this trip?" So I started doing further research, found his FBI file, because now he was deemed an enemy alien. And you could see the cuts and bruises on his neck, his chin, his face. And I checked the dates that I had of haiku poems that he had written, and he was in the jail when those beatings took place. What I just recently learned was that this was the officers' reaction to an organized protest. These men decided that they would lay in their bed with their underwear, and they were not going to cooperate when they were supposed to be marched out to the train to take them to the internment camps. And so the man that took these pictures wrote on the back of the photograph that the officers became very enraged when the men didn't cooperate, and that the men referred to it as their lay down strike, that if they were going to be taken, they were going to be taken not at their will. So my parents were separated for almost 2 years. My father was in Bismarck, North Dakota, and my mother was left behind with my brother and myself in Tule Lake. The war ended in 1945, but my parents weren't released until 1946. And so in 1946, there was a reunification effort because they were going to remove all of those dissidents and deport them from Crystal City, Texas. So we're finally reunited in this top photo. And when I was teaching at Sac State, I taught a lot about trauma effect. And one of the things that I noticed as I looked at all of our child photos in prison camp was expression on our face. So in the process of preparing for being deported, Wayne Collins, the ACLU attorney, actually got a stay. Although some had been deported, my parents were fortunate that Wayne Collins had proven that the renunciation of citizenship was forced under duress, and therefore unconstitutional to be rid of this group of Japanese Americans. So there was apparently a German photographer that was offered to take portraits of families before they departed. So that's what that top picture is. And so it's just within days of my father coming back to be with us, and he was a total stranger to me. And the opening chapter in my book is the day that we're on the train, leaving free of imprisonment. And we went to Cincinnati, Ohio. This was my 3rd birthday. And a precious photo to me because I feel like we got our childhood back. So in that photo, that's me on the end, and that's my brother and other children. After the Smithsonian visit and realizing how little I knew, I began asking my friends, other Japanese Americans who had been children in the camps, what they remembered. What did their parents say? What was the story? And found that, like myself, we only had bits and pieces of our early childhood experience. So I began to organize children of the camps. We would call it group therapy. But if I used that word in the Japanese community, they would scatter. So we called them educational programs. And I ran 110 of those during this period. And then from that experience, made a documentary about the stories we had gathered. And my younger brother, top right, was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, where we went. Afterwards, we're told not to come back to the West Coast because people didn't want to hire Japanese people, and they wouldn't rent housing. So my father had an aunt in Cincinnati, Ohio. So we went there and stayed for about 2 years, and then eventually came back to San Francisco. So fast forward into the present time. There we have a pilgrimage to Tule Lake every 2 years. And so this was the moment that we heard that Trump was separating the children from their families. And news showed these images of children screaming and crying while they're being torn from the parents' arms. And so this top picture is those of us, many of us on this pilgrimage, but many of them holding the banners particularly were like myself, children in the prison camps. And that building in the back on the left is the jail where my father was beaten. And kind of spontaneously, we gathered to protest against the current repetition of our history. And the photo below was actually the Buddhist church Sunday school photo, but it captured a feeling of how many children were being imprisoned that were held behind barbed wire. And on the far right, in the second row in the corner, that's my mother holding my brother in her arms. So this was the start of organized protests by Japanese Americans about today's current inhumane treatment of people who are seeking asylum, looking for protection in our country. So we started to organize ourselves, and this is like a split between one there. Okay, that's great. And by this time, we're all in our 80s and 90s. And we were damn mad. And so we went to South Texas and showed up at these detention sites. And I have to tell you, we showed up with our hearing aids, our walkers, our wheelchairs, whatever else we needed to say, unlike our experience when no one showed up for us, we were going to show up for them. And while we were planning this, I said, you know, I had been inside, and the barbed wire fence is far away from the actual facility, but that people could climb up on each other's shoulders and they could look out the top window across the top. And I said, I want the children to know that somebody outside cared. So let's do something colorful on the fences. And my colleague said, we need to make tsuru, so paper folded cranes. And yeah, I said, yeah, that's a great idea. We need to make 1,000 of them. And he said, no, we need to make 10,000. And we start to put the word out to our families and friends and our neighbors, and gave them the address to ship their strung paper cranes to a local social justice organization that was supporting our effort. And when we got there, there were 30,000 cranes waiting for us. And so we hung them on the fence, and we're hoping that we'd get enough press coverage. And a lot of press showed up. Democracy Now! Showed up. They did a story. They like it when old people show up. And they said, oh, Telemundo showed up. So Telemundo is the Spanish language program, and it's the only program they could see inside the facility. So they got a live view, because the day before, the only people that could go in, the professionals that could go in, were the attorneys that were working to represent the mothers. And so we got the word out to Carl, the young man that asked me to come in the first place. And he got the word to the ACLU attorneys that were going in there to tell the mothers to listen for the taiko drums that we brought and to look for the origami paper cranes and to let them know that someone outside cared. Let's go back. Okay, great. And this is Ivan and Ilda from Central America. They have been in sanctuary in the Catholic Church in South Texas ever since Ivan was 3 years old. We went there for a press conference to highlight their story. And this is our organization, Tsuru for Solidarity, that came out of the early demonstrations that we were doing. Okay. So if you want to know more details, the book is available on, we encourage you to buy it from local bookstores, but if you have to, it is available on Amazon.
Any questions? We've got time for a few questions. Tsuru, what does that mean?
Tsuru means,
What does it mean?
it refers to the paper crane.
Oh, thank you.
Tsuru, the translation is crane, bird.
Into the microphone.
Oh, sorry, means bird, crane.
Other questions? Thank you.
Anybody have any questions they want to?
Do you know what the current situation is in those camps along the border? Are they separating children from parents still?
On? No, it is. Oh, the light's not on. Oh, okay. The current situation is horrific. Trump's intention to build more and more, even within our local communities, is happening now. So I don't know if you know where Dublin, California is. There was a women's prison there that was shut down a year ago because of the repeated sexual assaults, a massive use of that prison to assault
Yeah.
women. So currently, the executive director of that prison, what do you call them? Warden. The warden, multiple numbers of guards, and the chaplain have been charged and found guilty, and they're behind bars right now. But there was word that there were federal inspectors coming to check it out. They're going to rebuild it, clean it up, and use it to house women and children. Yes. And that's why they can, it's a federal agency that could go in there. And they found out that there was lots of mold and asbestos. So it's going to cost millions of dollars, but they have allocated trillions of dollars to rebuild and multiply these detention facilities. And, you know, they're prisons. They are prisons.
I heard that there's in California a detention place, so I just looked it up, and we think, you know, in California, do we have one? Yes, it's it said it's near Ridgecrest. It's in Kern County. Recently opened and holds 2,560 detainees, making it the largest in California. Just breaks my heart.
Well, what can we do?
Wait.
Yeah, we got to show up.
Ridgecrest is also a decommissioned Navy military facility, if I remember right, that was decommissioned a number of years ago. So I'm not surprised that there are still facilities up there. There's also one in California City that's a private.
That's right.
Private prison.
one- Right. They have reactivated it and working on it in preparation for 4,000 beds.
Wait. No, it's not that, but. Yeah, and for the recording so that.
Yeah,
people can-
okay. When you went down there, how were you met by the authorities?
You know, that was Trump 101.
Not mine?
No, it's mine. I got it.
Oh, I was gonna say.
That's to remind me to stop talking.
You got 5 minutes.
So at that time, they weren't militarized the way they are now. Later on, we did then, in more recent times, did a big demonstration at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. Thank you. And the military officer there told us to get off, that you can't demonstrate in front of a military fort. And us grannies and grandpas said, no, we're not moving. And Democracy Now! Showed up and put the mic right in front of my mouth. And they said, what are you going to do now? And I said, we've been removed too many times. We're not moving. And so they let us, they didn't arrest us. But I think today is a different story. We know now that if we do any kind of civil disobedience, that bad things will happen. And we're facing that now. So tomorrow is No King's Day, and I hope people show up.
I have a question for you. So I hadn't heard about the demonstrations like your father had in the camps of the Japanese that were basically renouncing their citizenship. Do you have any idea what percentage of the detainees were treated like your father was and thrown into those jails?
I don't know the exact numbers. I never did well in statistics anyway.
Just roughly, a
But
feeling.
I can tell you that if you answered no to those loyalty questions, you were immediately labeled as disloyal. There was no proof of any disloyal activity. There was no spying. There was no third column activities or nobody even had connection with Japan. But people like my parents who had given up hope. So all of the people that said no were taken from the 10 different War Relocation Authority prison camps and all put in Tule Lake. So that was the maximum security prison. That's where all the dissidents were placed.
One more.
Dr. Ina, I'm really curious after talking to other children that survived the camp and seeing how accomplished and strong you've been. Could you comment on resilience, where it comes from personally and what you saw in others?
You know, one of the heaviest burdens that we've had to live with is this model minority concept. This idea that other ethnic groups who have suffered oppression didn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps like the Japanese did after they're incarcerated. And we feel like that is a deliberate effort to divide us and keep us in competition with each other. And resilience shows up in so many ways. I feel like my family was resilient, but they were not healed. You know, it was like our symptoms, the way we cope to be good so that you don't get into trouble, that it sounds so simple to say, and yet it was a burden. Any little thing, if I cheated playing jacks, I was consumed with guilt, felt like I'm responsible for anything bad that's going to happen next. And this is the trauma effect. So for some people, then it looks like, wow, you know, your children are doctors and lawyers and professors. So how wonderful that is. But at great cost, I would say. Yeah. And I'll tell you this before I'm told to really stop talking. Standing in front of that detention facility in Texas and chanting and yelling and singing and dancing was such a powerful healing moment. We were laughing and crying, all of us old guys, laughing and crying because we felt the first time this release that we were using our voice to stop something horrible that was being done, that we couldn't do that when we were the victims. So I feel like now the resilience is showing up, you know. Yeah. Thanks for your question.
Thank you so, so much. Hard to talk after hearing your story.